Hello, my friends. Today, I want to take you on a journey back in time. It is the story of Cleopatra, the last queen of ancient Egypt. Her life was full of drama, love, power, and ambition. She was not just a queen who wore a crown. She was a woman who shaped history. People remember her even today, more than 2,000 years later. Listening to her story will not only help you practice English, but it will also inspire you with lessons about courage, intelligence, and never giving up. Our story begins in the year 69 BCE, in the famous city of Alexandria in Egypt. At this time, Alexandria was one of the greatest cities in the world. It had tall white buildings, busy markets, beautiful gardens, and a famous library filled with thousands of books. Ships came from many countries to trade goods like spices, gold, and silk. In this lively city, a baby girl was born into the royal family. Her name was Cleopatra, and although no one knew it then, she would grow up to become one of the most powerful and unforgettable rulers in history. Cleopatra was not fully Egyptian by blood. Her family, called the Ptolemaic dynasty, originally came from Greece. Many years before, Alexander the Great, the famous conqueror, had taken control of Egypt. After his death, one of his generals, named Ptolemy, became king of Egypt, and his descendants continued to rule for almost 300 years. Cleopatra was part of this Greek family, but she would later prove that her heart belonged to Egypt more than any of her ancestors. Her father was King Ptolemy XIII. Historians are not completely sure who her mother was, but many believe she was Cleopatra V, also from the royal family. Cleopatra grew up in the royal palace, surrounded by riches and luxury. She had fine clothes, jewelry, delicious food, and servants to take care of her. But life in a royal family was never truly safe or peaceful. There were always fights over who should be king or queen, and sometimes family members even turned against each other for power. From a young age, Cleopatra understood that knowledge was the strongest weapon. While many women in those days were not given a proper education, Cleopatra studied very hard. She learned mathematics, science, history, literature, and especially politics. She also loved languages. It is said that she could speak at least 7 languages, including Greek, Egyptian, Latin, and even Hebrew. Most of her royal family did not even bother to learn Egyptian, but Cleopatra did. This made her very different and much closer to the people of Egypt. Imagine how powerful she must have seemed, speaking directly to her people in their own language when other rulers could not. But Cleopatra's strength was not only in her education. She also had charm and confidence. People who met her said she had a beautiful and warm voice, and when she spoke, it was impossible not to listen. She was not just admired for her looks, but also for her intelligence, wit, and presence. She knew how to make people trust her, and this would help her later when she became queen. Still, her childhood was not always happy. Her father, King Ptolemy XIII, was not a strong ruler. Many Egyptians thought he was weak and wasted money. Sometimes the royal family even had to leave Egypt to escape danger. This taught Cleopatra from an early age that being a ruler meant facing enemies both inside and outside her family. When Cleopatra was about 14 years old, her life changed in a painful way. Her mother disappeared from history. Some believe she died, while others think she might have been killed. Soon after, her father became very sick. Cleopatra was still a teenager, but she already understood that she would one day need to fight for the throne. Life in the palace was dangerous, but she had prepared herself with knowledge, skills, and determination. Unlike many rulers before her, Cleopatra truly loved Egypt. She respected the traditions of the land and even presented herself as the goddess Isis, who was seen as a powerful protector in Egyptian mythology. She wanted the people to see her not only as a queen, but also as a divine figure connected to their culture. By the time she was a young woman, Cleopatra was ready. She was intelligent, brave, and determined. But her path to power would not be easy. She had enemies both in her own family and in the great Roman Empire that was growing stronger every day. And so, her incredible journey to becoming the Queen of Egypt was about to begin. When Cleopatra was about 18 years old, her father, King Ptolemy XII, died. His death was a turning point in her life. In his will, he declared that Cleopatra would rule Egypt, but not alone. She was required to share the throne with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was only about 10 years old at the time. In ancient Egypt, it was common for brothers and sisters in the royal family to marry and rule together. This may sound unusual today, but back then, it was a tradition meant to keep power inside the royal family. And so Cleopatra became queen, but officially she was ruling together with her little brother. At first, Cleopatra tried to take her role seriously. She believed she was ready to rule Egypt because she had studied hard all her life. She knew about history, politics, trade, and languages. Her brother, however, was just a child. He did not have the knowledge or the experience to rule a powerful country. Cleopatra believed she should be the true ruler, but her brother's advisors thought differently. The royal advisors around Ptolemy XIII did not like Cleopatra. They did not want a young woman to rule on her own, especially one who was smart and strong-willed. They preferred Ptolemy XIII because he was easy to control. Very soon, they began plotting against Cleopatra. Cleopatra's life became dangerous. The advisors turned her brother against her. They spread rumors that she wanted all the power for herself. Eventually, Cleopatra was forced out of the palace. She had to leave Alexandria and escape into the desert with only a few loyal supporters. Imagine this for a moment. Cleopatra, the rightful queen of Egypt, walking through the hot desert, her palace taken away, her throne stolen, her life in danger. She had no army, no home, and no power. Many people might have given up in such a hopeless situation, but Cleopatra was not the kind of person who accepted defeat. She started to make a plan. She knew that if she wanted her throne back, she needed help. She could not do it alone. At this time, something very important was happening in Egypt. A powerful Roman general named Julius Caesar had arrived in Alexandria.
Caesar was one of the most famous and influential men in the world. Rome was the greatest empire of the time, and Caesar was at the center of its power.
Cleopatra saw an opportunity. If she could win Caesar's support, she could defeat her brother's advisors and reclaim her throne. But there was a problem. She could not simply walk into the palace to meet Caesar, because her enemies would stop her. Cleopatra needed to do something bold, something dramatic that would surprise everyone. And so, she came up with a daring idea. One night, Cleopatra had one of her loyal servants wrap her inside a large carpet. Yes, a rolled-up carpet, the kind usually brought as a gift. The servant carried the carpet into Caesar's private chambers, as if it were a present. When the carpet was unrolled in front of Caesar, Cleopatra appeared. Imagine Caesar's surprise. Out of the carpet stepped this young, intelligent, and confident queen. Cleopatra introduced herself, and she did not beg for help like a weak ruler. Instead, she spoke with charm, intelligence, and determination. She told Caesar about her love for Egypt, about how her enemies had betrayed her, and about her dream of becoming a great queen. Caesar was impressed. He saw that Cleopatra was not only beautiful, but also brilliant and ambitious. He realized that helping her would also be good for Rome, because Egypt was a rich and important land. Caesar agreed to support Cleopatra. Together, they planned how to defeat Ptolemy XIII and his advisors. Soon, a fierce battle broke out. Caesar and Cleopatra's forces fought against Ptolemy XIII's army. The fighting was intense, but in the end, Cleopatra and Caesar were victorious. Ptolemy XIII was defeated, and Cleopatra regained her throne. Now Cleopatra was queen once again, but this time she was stronger than before. She had proven her courage and cleverness. She also built a powerful alliance with Caesar, one of the greatest men of Rome. But Cleopatra's story did not stop here. Winning back her throne was only the beginning. She still had to face new challenges, build her power, and protect Egypt in a world where Rome was becoming stronger every day. And so, Cleopatra's rule as queen truly began, with Caesar by her side and with her dream of making Egypt powerful once again. Imagine the scene. Cleopatra arriving in Rome, dressed in shining clothes, riding in golden chariots, bringing exotic animals, perfumes, and precious jewels from Egypt. The Romans had never seen anything like her. She wanted to make a statement. Egypt was rich, Egypt was strong, and she was its queen. In Rome, Cleopatra stayed in a luxurious villa provided by Caesar. She attended banquets, met Roman leaders, and even influenced Roman fashion with her Egyptian style. But not everyone welcomed her. Many Roman women were jealous or upset because Cleopatra was different. She was confident, glamorous, and unafraid to stand out. During this time, Caesar's own power in Rome was growing. He declared himself dictator for life, meaning he had complete control of the Roman government. Cleopatra saw this as good news, because it could make her alliance with Caesar even stronger. She hoped it would protect both her throne and her son's future. But Caesar's growing power created enemies. Many Roman senators feared he was becoming too powerful, like a king, which they hated.
In secret, they began plotting against him. In 44 BCE, something terrible happened. On a day that has become famous in history, Julius Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators inside the Roman Senate. They stabbed him many times, believing they were saving Rome from tyranny. His death shocked the world. For Cleopatra, it was devastating. She had lost her greatest ally, her partner, and the father of her child. Suddenly, she was in great danger. Without Caesar, many Romans saw her as a threat. She knew she could not stay in Rome any longer. Quickly, Cleopatra gathered her servants, her treasures, and her son Caesarion, and she fled back to Egypt. It was a painful and dangerous journey, but Cleopatra was determined to survive. Back in Egypt, Cleopatra did not allow grief to destroy her. She mourned Caesar, but she continued to rule with strength. She worked to keep Egypt stable, improved its economy, and trained her son to be a leader. She taught him about politics, strategy, and the responsibilities of ruling a kingdom. But Cleopatra also knew one important truth. Egypt was still in danger. Rome was the most powerful empire in the world, and without Caesar's protection, Egypt could easily become a target. She needed a new alliance. She needed a new partner who could help her protect her throne and her country. And soon, her path would cross with another powerful Roman leader, Mark Antony. Their meeting would lead to one of the most famous love stories in history. After Julius Caesar's death, Rome was thrown into chaos. Different powerful men wanted to control the empire. Among them were Octavian, who was Caesar's adopted son, Mark Antony, one of Caesar's closest generals, and a man named Lepidus. Together, they formed what was called the Second Triumvirate, a group of 3 leaders who ruled Rome. But it was clear they did not trust each other, and sooner or later they would fight for more power. Mark Antony was very different from Caesar. He was younger, strong, and famous as a brave soldier. People admired him for his courage on the battlefield. He was also handsome, confident, and very charming. He liked celebrations, games, and living life in a grand way. Cleopatra, now ruling Egypt alone with her young son, Caesarion, understood that Rome's power was still a great threat to her country. She needed to build an alliance again, just as she had done with Caesar. Mark Antony was now one of the most important men in Rome, and Cleopatra knew that if she could win his support, Egypt would be safe. Mark Antony also wanted something from Cleopatra. He was preparing for wars in the East and needed money, supplies, and ships. Egypt was rich, and Cleopatra was the key to getting what he needed. So he invited Cleopatra to meet him in the city of Tarsus, which is in modern Turkey today.
Cleopatra knew this meeting would be very important, and she wanted to impress Antony from the very first moment. She planned her entrance carefully, making it unforgettable. When she sailed into Tarsus, she did not arrive like an ordinary queen. She came on a golden ship with silver oars shining in the sun. The sails were purple, the color of royalty, and the air was filled with the sweet smell of perfumes and flowers. Cleopatra herself was dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Around her, her servants were dressed as gods and goddesses.
The people who saw this were amazed. It was not just an arrival. It was a performance, a display of wealth, power, and beauty. When Mark Antony saw Cleopatra, he was stunned. He had heard stories about her charm and intelligence, but seeing her in person was something else. She spoke with wit, confidence, and grace, and Antony was completely captivated. After this first meeting, Cleopatra invited Antony to Egypt. He accepted, and soon he traveled to Alexandria, where Cleopatra showed him the wonders of her land. Together, they enjoyed lavish banquets, music, dancing, and games. They laughed, shared stories, and spent long nights talking about politics, war, and the future. Slowly, their connection grew deeper. Cleopatra and Antony fell in love. Their relationship was not only about romance, but also about power. Cleopatra gave Antony wealth and resources to support his campaigns, and Antony gave Cleopatra protection from Rome. They both knew they were stronger together. Their love story became one of the most famous in history. They were often seen together, celebrating, hunting, or sailing on the Nile. Cleopatra was unlike any woman Antony had ever met. She was a queen who could stand beside him as an equal. And Antony gave Cleopatra the Roman military support she needed. Over time, Cleopatra and Antony had 3 children together: a son named Alexander Helios, a daughter named Cleopatra Selene, and another son named Ptolemy Philadelphus. Cleopatra was proud of her growing family and believed that one day her children could rule over a great empire that combined the strength of Egypt and Rome. But their love and alliance created enemies. In Rome, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, grew jealous and angry. He believed that Antony was betraying Rome by giving too much attention to Cleopatra. Antony was already married to Octavian's sister, Octavia, but he chose to stay with Cleopatra instead. This insulted Octavian and made the rivalry between them even stronger. Rumors began to spread in Rome. People said Cleopatra had bewitched Antony, that she was using her beauty and charm to control him. They said Antony was no longer loyal to Rome, but was living in luxury in Egypt with a foreign queen. These rumors were dangerous because they turned many Romans against Antony and Cleopatra. Finally, Octavian declared war, not just on Antony, but directly on Cleopatra. He told the Roman people that Egypt was the enemy, and he convinced them that Cleopatra was the reason for Antony's betrayal. Antony and Cleopatra now had no choice but to fight.
The final showdown came in 31 BCE at a great naval battle known as the Battle of Actium. This battle took place near the coast of Greece. On one side was Octavian with his strong, disciplined Roman fleet. On the other side were Antony and Cleopatra with their combined forces, including Egypt's navy. On the morning of the battle, the sea was filled with hundreds of ships. The air was tense. Soldiers shouted commands, and the clashing of swords and shields echoed across the water. Cleopatra's ships were beautifully decorated, but Octavian's fleet was stronger and better organized. The battle began fiercely. Antony's soldiers fought bravely, and Cleopatra's navy tried to match Octavian's strength. But as the fighting grew harder, something unexpected happened. Cleopatra's flagship suddenly turned and sailed away from the battle. Her entire fleet followed her. Why did she do this? Some historians believe Cleopatra retreated to protect her ships and her life. Others think it was part of a secret plan with Antony. But at that moment, Antony did not understand. Seeing Cleopatra's fleet leave the battlefield, Antony thought she had betrayed him. Heartbroken and confused, he abandoned the fight and followed her ship. Without Antony's leadership, his remaining soldiers lost hope. Octavian's forces quickly destroyed what was left of Antony's navy. The battle was over. Octavian had won. Antony and Cleopatra returned to Egypt devastated. Their dream of ruling a powerful empire together was collapsing. Still, they tried to gather new armies and prepare for one last defense. But Octavian was already on his way to Egypt with his victorious army. When Octavian's forces finally entered Alexandria, Antony tried to fight once more, but his soldiers were outnumbered and too weak. Antony's army was defeated, and he believed everything was lost. In his despair, Antony received false news that Cleopatra was dead. Believing the love of his life was gone, Antony fell on his own sword. Mortally wounded, he was carried to Cleopatra's hiding place. There, he discovered that Cleopatra was still alive. As he lay dying, Cleopatra held him in her arms. Antony took his last breath in the presence of the woman he loved, leaving her heartbroken and alone. Now, Cleopatra faced Octavian. She knew he would take her to Rome as a prisoner to parade her in chains as proof of his victory. Cleopatra, however, was proud and would not allow herself to be humiliated in this way. She decided to choose her own fate. In her final moments, Cleopatra dressed herself in her royal robes and crown. She surrounded herself with her treasures and symbols of power, as if preparing for a final ceremony. According to legend, she arranged for a poisonous snake, an asp, to be brought to her in a basket. She let the snake bite her, and within moments, the great queen of Egypt died, by her own choice. When Octavian entered her chamber, he found Cleopatra lying peacefully, dressed as a queen, with her crown still on her head. He was shocked, but he also admired her courage. Cleopatra had chosen to die with dignity, rather than live as a prisoner. With Cleopatra's death, Egypt fell under Roman control. It became a province of Rome, and Octavian returned home victorious. Later, he became the first emperor of Rome, taking the name Augustus. But even though Egypt lost its independence, Cleopatra's story did not end with her death. Her life, her intelligence, her courage, and her great love with Antony became legendary. For centuries, poets, writers, and historians have told her story. She is remembered as a queen, but also as a symbol of strength, ambition, and resilience. Cleopatra's death marked the end of an era. With her passing in 30 BCE, Egypt was no longer ruled by its own pharaohs. For thousands of years, Egypt had been one of the greatest civilizations in history, led by kings and queens who were seen as gods on earth. But after Cleopatra, Egypt became just another province under the rule of Rome. Octavian, who soon took the title Augustus, became the first emperor of Rome. His victory over Cleopatra and Antony gave him great power and respect. For the Romans, Cleopatra was remembered as the dangerous queen who had tried to use her beauty and intelligence to control their leaders. But for many others, her story was far more than that.
Cleopatra's legacy lived on in many ways. She was not just a queen who fought for survival, she was also a woman of learning, culture, and strategy. She spoke many languages and was deeply interested in science, medicine, and philosophy. She studied the traditions of Egypt while also welcoming Greek and Roman ideas. Her court in Alexandria became a center of knowledge and culture where scholars, artists, and thinkers gathered. She was also remembered as a queen who was not afraid to stand against Rome, the most powerful empire of her time. While many rulers bowed before Roman power, Cleopatra tried to protect her country's independence. She used every skill she had, her intelligence, her charm, her wealth, and her alliances with Caesar and Antony, to defend Egypt. Even though she did not succeed in the end, her courage made her unforgettable. Legends about Cleopatra spread far and wide. Writers in Rome told stories of her beauty and her dramatic death. Poets and historians wrote about her love for Antony, turning their story into one of the greatest romances of history. Centuries later, artists, painters, and playwrights were inspired by her life. In the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Cleopatra appeared in plays and poems. William Shakespeare wrote about her in his famous play Antony and Cleopatra, making her story even more legendary. But beyond the myths, there was also the real Cleopatra, a leader who worked tirelessly to protect her people. She faced enormous challenges: the growing power of Rome, the betrayal of allies, and the struggles of ruling a divided land. Yet, she never gave up until her last breath. Even today, Cleopatra remains a symbol of strength, intelligence, and independence. She is remembered as one of the most powerful women in history, someone who could stand alongside great rulers and command respect. She showed the world that a queen could be just as strong, clever, and determined as any king or emperor. In Egypt, her death also carried deep meaning. With Cleopatra gone, the long line of pharaohs ended forever. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt, the last to wear the crown and hold the traditions of a civilization that had lasted for more than 3,000 years. Her life was the closing chapter of ancient Egypt's glory, and her death was the beginning of Roman Egypt. But perhaps the most powerful part of Cleopatra's legacy is the way her story continues to live. More than 2,000 years later, people still speak her name. They still write books, make films, and tell stories about her. She became larger than life, not just a queen of Egypt, but a timeless figure who represents ambition, courage, and the complexity of human love and power. In the end, Cleopatra was more than a woman who loved Caesar and Antony. She was a ruler who dreamed of keeping Egypt free, a leader who fought against impossible odds, and a queen whose story still shines through the pages of history. After Cleopatra's death, Egypt entered a new chapter of its history. The land that had once been ruled by mighty pharaohs was now under the control of Rome. Octavian, who became Augustus, declared Egypt his personal possession. Unlike other provinces of the Roman Empire, Egypt was not ruled by the Senate or shared with Roman governors.
Instead, it was placed directly under the authority of the emperor himself. This showed how valuable Egypt was. Egypt was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. Its rich soil and yearly flooding of the Nile River produced huge amounts of grain. This grain was sent to Rome to feed its growing population. Control of Egypt meant control of food for millions of people. Augustus understood this, and that is why he kept Egypt under his direct rule. For the Egyptian people, life changed. They were no longer ruled by a native queen or king. Roman officials now managed taxes, trade, and military forces. Roman soldiers guarded Alexandria, the capital city, to prevent any rebellion. The once great kingdom of the pharaohs had become a province far away from the center of power.
Yet, Egyptian traditions did not disappear completely. The temples were still active, priests continued their rituals, and the people carried on with their festivals. But slowly, Roman culture mixed with Egyptian life. New buildings, statues, and inscriptions appeared that showed both Roman and Egyptian styles together. Alexandria remained a great city of learning, but now its scholars worked under Roman authority. Cleopatra's children also faced uncertain futures. She had 4 children in total, one with Julius Caesar, named Caesarion, and 3 with Mark Antony: Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus. After the defeat of their parents, these children were taken to Rome. Octavian ordered Caesarion, the son of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, to be killed. He saw Caesarion as a dangerous rival because some people in Egypt believed he was the true heir of Caesar. Augustus wanted no threats to his power, so the boy was quietly executed. With Caesarion's death, the bloodline of the pharaohs ended. The other 3 children, however, were spared. They were taken to Rome and raised by Octavia, the sister of Octavian and the former wife of Mark Antony. This was a strange twist of fate. The children of Cleopatra were now growing up in the house of the woman who had once been their father's Roman wife. Of these children, Cleopatra Selene became the most famous. She was married to King Juba II of Mauritania, a kingdom in North Africa. Together, they ruled successfully, and she carried some of her mother's legacy with her. In her new land, Cleopatra Selene built palaces and monuments that reflected both Egyptian and Roman culture. Through her, the memory of Cleopatra continued to live. Meanwhile, Rome grew stronger. With Egypt under its control, the empire had secure access to grain, gold, and trade routes. Augustus used this wealth to strengthen his rule, and Rome entered a long period of peace known as the Pax Romana. For the world, Cleopatra's fall marked the end of independent Egypt. For thousands of years, Egypt had been one of the greatest civilizations, but now it was part of a much larger empire. The pyramids and temples still stood, but the voice of the pharaohs was silent forever. Yet the story of Cleopatra and Antony did not disappear. Roman writers like Plutarch recorded their lives, though often with bias against Cleopatra. They painted her as a woman who seduced powerful men and brought them to ruin. But even in their criticism, they could not ignore her brilliance, her courage, and her charm. The world after Cleopatra was different. Egypt became Roman, and Rome became even more powerful. But Cleopatra's memory refused to die. She remained a symbol of the past glory of Egypt and a warning to Rome of how love, ambition, and politics could change the fate of empires. After Cleopatra's death, her story did not end. In fact, it began a new life in myths, stories, and legends. Different cultures remembered her in different ways. Some saw her as a dangerous woman who used beauty to control men. Others saw her as a brilliant queen who fought bravely for her country. Over time, truth and myth mixed together, making Cleopatra one of the most famous women in history. In Rome, writers shaped the earliest stories about Cleopatra. Historians like Plutarch, Diocasius, and others wrote about her life, but they often showed her from a Roman point of view. To them, Cleopatra was not just a queen, she was an enemy who had almost changed the future of Rome. They described her as clever, ambitious, and seductive. Sometimes they made her sound like a sorceress who could charm even the strongest men. This image made her seem dangerous, but also unforgettable. One of the most popular myths was about her beauty. Roman writers claimed that Cleopatra's beauty was irresistible and that men like Caesar and Antony were helpless against her. But many historians today believe her true power was not just beauty, it was her intelligence, her skill in politics, and her ability to speak many languages. She could talk directly to people from different lands without translators. She understood science, philosophy, and medicine. She was more than just a beautiful queen. She was a leader with a sharp mind. Another myth surrounded her death. Many stories said that Cleopatra died by letting a snake, an asp, bite her. The image of the proud queen choosing death with a snake in her hand became legendary. Painters, poets, and writers across centuries used this image to show her courage and drama. But historians still debate whether this story is true. Some think she may have used poison hidden in a comb or ointment instead. Still, the myth of the snake became the most powerful symbol of her end.
In the centuries that followed, her legend spread far beyond Egypt and Rome. In the Middle Ages, Arab historians wrote about her, sometimes calling her a wise woman who had great knowledge of science and magic. In Europe, she appeared in poems and plays. During the Renaissance, when people rediscovered classical history, Cleopatra became even more famous. Artists painted her last moments, showing her as both beautiful and tragic. One of the greatest works that shaped her myth was William Shakespeare's play Antony and Cleopatra. Written in the early 1600s, it turned her life into a dramatic story of love, power, and death. Shakespeare described her as a woman of endless charm, someone whose very presence could change the mood of a room. His words gave her immortality, ensuring that her story would be told again and again. In modern times, Cleopatra continued to inspire. Novels, operas, and films retold her life. In the 20th century, the famous Hollywood film starring Elizabeth Taylor presented her as a queen of dazzling beauty and power, wearing golden crowns and magnificent costumes. This movie introduced Cleopatra to millions of people around the world, making her a symbol of glamour as well as history. But the myths also created misunderstandings. Many people began to think Cleopatra was only about love and beauty, forgetting her political skill and determination to save her country. The real Cleopatra was far more complex than the legends suggest. She was a woman who lived at a turning point in history, caught between the dying world of the pharaohs and the rising power of Rome. Still, these myths and stories gave her a kind of immortality. While other rulers of her time were forgotten, Cleopatra's name survived for more than 2,000 years. She became larger than life, not just a queen, but a symbol of passion, ambition, courage, and mystery. The power of her story lies in the fact that people continue to reinvent her. Every generation sees something different in Cleopatra. Some see her as a tragic lover, some as a clever ruler, and others as a symbol of female power in a world ruled by men. Her myths keep her alive, and her legend still grows today. Cleopatra's story did not end in history books. For more than 2,000 years, she has influenced art, literature, and culture all around the world. Artists, writers, musicians, and filmmakers have all tried to capture her life, her beauty, and her power. She became more than just a queen. She became a symbol, an icon who continues to inspire creativity. In art, Cleopatra's image has been painted and sculptured in many different ways. Ancient Roman artists often showed her as a powerful queen, sometimes dressed like the goddess Isis. During the Renaissance, European painters created dramatic scenes of her death, usually with the famous snake. Painters loved this moment because it showed both tragedy and beauty. Painters like Guido Reni and Jean-André Rixens made Cleopatra's death into a symbol of passion and courage. In literature, Cleopatra became one of the most written about women in history. Ancient writers such as Plutarch influenced how later generations saw her, but it was Shakespeare who gave her everlasting life in drama. His play, Antony and Cleopatra, presented her as mysterious, emotional, and powerful. The play showed her not just as a ruler, but as a woman whose love changed the fate of empires. Later, poets and novelists continued to write about her, sometimes as a dangerous seductress, and sometimes as a strong leader. In music, Cleopatra inspired operas and songs. Composers in the 17th and 18th centuries, such as Handel, wrote operas about her story. These performances filled theaters with emotion as audiences watched the fall of the proud Egyptian queen through music and song.
In popular culture, Cleopatra became a star of cinema. The most famous film was Cleopatra, 1963, with Elizabeth Taylor playing the Queen. This movie was one of the most expensive films ever made at the time, filled with golden costumes, grand palaces, and huge battles. It showed Cleopatra as both glamorous and intelligent, a woman who could rule a kingdom and also win the hearts of powerful men. The film helped keep her legend alive for modern audiences. Beyond movies, Cleopatra also became a symbol in fashion and advertising. Designers created clothes and jewelry inspired by her style. Her use of makeup, especially kohl eyeliner, influenced beauty trends for centuries. Even today, many makeup brands use Cleopatra's name to sell products that promise elegance and power. Cleopatra also influenced how people think about women in history. For centuries, many stories focused on her relationships with Caesar and Antony, as if her worth came only from the men she loved. But modern scholars and writers have started to look at her differently. They see her as a capable ruler who fought to protect Egypt against one of the strongest empires in the world. They remind us that she spoke many languages, studied science, and made bold political choices. This new view of Cleopatra shows her not only as a lover, but as a leader. Her story has also shaped ideas about power and love. In art and literature, Cleopatra often represents the struggle between passion and politics, between personal feelings and public duty. She reminds us that even the strongest leaders are still human, with emotions and desires. At the same time, she represents female power in a world dominated by men, showing that a woman could stand against Rome itself, even if she was eventually defeated. Through art, literature, music, and culture, Cleopatra became larger than life. She transformed from a real queen into a legend that inspires people across centuries. Each generation creates a new Cleopatra, sometimes dangerous, sometimes romantic, sometimes wise, but always unforgettable. Her influence shows the power of stories to travel through time, shaping how people see history and themselves. Cleopatra's life may have ended more than 2,000 years ago, but her legacy continues to live on. She's remembered not only as the last queen of Egypt, but as one of the most powerful, intelligent, and fascinating women in history. Her story teaches us many lessons about courage, ambition, and the importance of standing up for what you believe in. Cleopatra showed the world that a leader does not have to be a man to be strong and effective. She ruled Egypt during a time of danger, surrounded by enemies, political plots, and the growing power of Rome. Yet she managed to protect her country, strengthen its economy, and maintain its culture. She spoke many languages, studied science and politics, and used her intelligence to make strategic alliances. She proved that knowledge and cleverness are as powerful as armies and weapons. Her life also teaches us about bravery. Cleopatra faced enormous challenges, from threats within her own family to wars with Rome. She never gave up, even when her life was in danger. When Antony died and Octavian's army approached, she chose to face her fate with dignity. She controlled her own destiny to the very end, refusing to be humiliated or treated as a prisoner. This courage made her legendary. Cleopatra's influence also extends to love and relationships. Her romances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony are famous, not just for passion, but for their political importance. These relationships show how personal connections can shape history, but they also remind us that even great love cannot always overcome political forces. Cleopatra's life combined intelligence, strategy, and emotion, making her story timeless. Through myths, legends, art, and literature, Cleopatra became more than a historical figure. She became a symbol. She represents strength, intelligence, independence, and resilience. Artists painted her dramatic death, writers created plays about her love and power, and filmmakers brought her story to life on the big screen. Every generation reimagines her in its own way, but her essence remains the same: a brilliant, daring, and unforgettable queen. Even her children carried part of her legacy. Cleopatra Selene, her daughter with Mark Antony, ruled in North Africa and maintained a connection to both Egyptian and Roman traditions. Through her, the memory of Cleopatra's family and their cultural achievements survived for another generation. Today, people around the world study Cleopatra, not just as a queen of Egypt, but as a symbol of women's potential. She inspires leaders, scholars, artists, and ordinary people to be bold, to use knowledge wisely, and to stand strong in the face of challenges. Her life shows that determination, intelligence, and courage can leave a lasting mark on history. Cleopatra's life reminds us that greatness is not only about victories or wealth. It is about how you face challenges, protect what you love, and leave the world a little different than you found it. Her life may have ended in tragedy, but her legacy continues to inspire. She was a queen, a scholar, a strategist, a mother, and a woman who refused to be forgotten. So, when we think of Cleopatra today, we see more than a beautiful queen who loved powerful men. We see a woman who shaped her world, fought for her country, and left a story that continues to teach courage, intelligence, and resilience. Cleopatra is timeless. She is unforgettable. Her life shows us that even in the face of great danger, loss, and challenges, we can rise above and leave our mark. She teaches us to dream big, to be brave, and to never let fear stop us. Cleopatra's story is not just history, it is a lesson, an inspiration, and a legacy that continues to shine across centuries.